Hello, everyone. How's it going? And I'm back on the last day of Global Hack Week. We actually started on day one, kind of. Day one, day two. And we started with like learning the basics of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in the beginners week. And now, towards the end of Global Hack Week, I'm back to complete what we started. So, welcome everyone, and I'm excited to get the time to actually complete it. How's everyone been? How's Global Hack Week been for you? Did you learn a lot in Beginners Week? Did you enjoy it? What did you like the most? Let me know in the chat. Meanwhile, may I kindly request you all to please register for the session. And while you are doing that, I'll also share the link in the chat, of course. Uh, while you're doing that, let me introduce myself to people who are joining me for the very first time. So, my name is UT. My name is Utkarsh, but everyone in MLH knows me as UT. So, that's what I prefer to go as. And I am currently working, but also I love streaming for Global Hack Week. So, here I am. Uh, I've done like so many streams in the past, and coincidentally, this is my 51st stream. So yeah, I'm really excited. Half century done. That is so good. Uh, there you go. The link to part 5 and the link to part 6, which would be right after this session. So what have we been doing? So we have been building, not beginning. We have been building some beginner level websites, I would say. Learning what is HTML, what is CSS, what is JavaScript. And by the end of our learning, not the end, like the last time we ended, like on part 4 of this session, we had built a considerable amount of stuff. Okay. Uh, we built a homepage, as you can see. We built a Pomodoro timer, which allows you to start a timer. You can decide how much time you want to work, how much time you want to rest. So you can do that. You can pause, you can reset, you can choose to reduce the time, you can choose to increase the break time, start that, let it work. Then we also built another project which was Box Shadow Generator, where it allows you to actually generate some box shadows. So you can decide the vertical length, horizontal length, what's the blur radius, what's the color of the shadow to this box, what's the opacity, should it be dark, should it be light. And there is another interesting button here, which is inset shadow. Should it be inside the box or should it be outside? And what it gives you is the CSS that you can then plug in any CSS file, and that will actually give you this whole effect. Okay, so this was inspired by another website. Also allows you to copy. So I can copy it, I can paste it somewhere. Then we also built a library page, which is the project that we are going to continue today. So we had done the HTML and CSS of it, but not the JavaScript. So that is why it doesn't work right now. Okay, so we'll focus on that. And Pomodoro timer, it's playtime. You can see there is this progress bar, I would say. Yeah, a progress bar which allows you to see your progress, how much time is left, and yeah, that's it. So if there are no further questions, let's get started. If you're joining me for the very first time, may I kindly request you all to get the code from the GitHub. Thank God for GitHub, right? So all the code that we have done so far, done till now, is available on GitHub. So you should be able to find all of it. I can give you a quick walkthrough. So we have like 4 folders here, which are our 4 projects. There is an index.html file, which is the main entry point to this website, which is what you see right here. I have created a navbar.html, which is empty right now. If towards the end of this session, if I have time, then I will show you that the navbar that we had initially created which is inside the index.html, can we export it outside, or take it out from index.html, put it in a separate file altogether, which is navbar.html, and then load this HTML file on every page. So that is the neat trick, I would say. Not exactly a trick, it's just a piece of code, right? But a neat piece of code that I really want to show you all, depending on how much time we have left towards the end of the session. Once again, I'll have like 2 sessions back to back. Wow, this is so white that makes my face look so bright. Uh, we have 2 sessions back to back. I'll give you like, let's say 10 minutes in between to just rest up, have some water, walk around, and yeah, I think that's big enough and good enough introduction. Now let's focus on writing some code. But before we write it, I still need to give you a quick walkthrough / revision of what we have done so far. So let me show it to you directly on inspect element, right? Okay, this is good. A bit. Okay, so if you go over to the inspect element by doing inspect, let's say, then you will, and you go under the elements panel. Let me also go away from screen so you can focus solely on screen. It should be big enough for everyone to see. If it is too small, let me know. Yeah, you will go over to this, to the elements page, and you can see there is, we had discussed in depth about the division in an HTML, which is head and body. And in the head, we define some stuff. We define, let's say, the title, which is what you see on the top right here. We added some CSS. This is a global CSS, which is style.css, that is being applied to all the files. Then we also have the title, sorry, the library.css, which is very specific to this library project. Then in the body, we saw the class and the ID. We saw these two types of, I would say, selectors, attributes. Uh, yeah, I think I would say selectors and attributes, one of those two. Then this project was kind of different from everything else that we had done. Why? Because after adding all the code of HTML, which, let me zoom in, yep, should be better visible. So after adding all of that, we actually added something called as a template, okay, a book row template, which is normally whatever you add there should be visible right here. But this one is interesting because this template has this additional document fragment, okay? And if I hover over it, normally if I hover over any section, you can see on the left hand side which part I'm highlighting. But if I hover over the template, nothing gets highlighted on the page because the template exists, but it does not exist here. Okay, so the idea of templates is that you create a template which will be used by JavaScript later to inject data. Okay, and so that's why we created this template, and it's a fragment of a document and it is not really visible here. And finally, we saw that to add a JavaScript code, you link it with the name towards the end of the body. We also had discussion about putting it in the head or putting it in the body. And there we go. That's, I think, a good enough introduction. The CSS, you can actually see the CSS as well that we have. So one is like we defined our variables in this case, I would say, for primary color, secondary color, background color. And when you hover over every bit and piece, you can kind of see what is the CSS that gets applied there. How does it look? Like, say, search container, background, padding, border radius, border color, margin, bottom. For the loading spinner, it's like initially hidden, but when we start loading the data using JavaScript, it will like become visible. error message, which is again initially hidden, but it will become visible later. Uh, yeah, I think that's it. Okay, so oh, hey, hi. Okay, so now let's start writing some JavaScript. Once again, if you don't have the code that I have, you can get it from the GitHub repository, from my GitHub repository. You can fork it, or you can clone it, or you can download the zip. We also discussed a lot in detail about this. Uh, yeah. Okay, let's start focusing on writing some code. Now, before we dive into the code, what are we building? So as I said, we are building a I don't know if I said this right now, but we are building a library project where the idea is, like if you look at the HTML, the idea is that you should be able to search for a book, or possibly an author name, genre, publisher name if you, for some reason you know that, language, and once you click search, it should go and hit this particular API, the Open Library Developers API, which is what we are solely going to focus on today. I have shared the link to the API in the chat, so please feel free to take a look at what the API looks like. But not ideally, I would say the two main parts of the APIs that we are going to use. The first one is the book search API. The second one is the covers API. Okay, uh, at least for today, these are my major focus. So the book search API, as the name suggests, it is for searching books. Okay, let me come back. Yeah, it will be for searching a book. Now they have a very nice example here. So if I search for Lord of the Rings, but in my case, I want to search for Percy plus Jackson. Okay, like this is one of the queries, and while that loads, uh, oh, it loaded quickly. Nice. So Percy Jackson book series, and this is the data that we get. It is huge. Okay, it is huge, really. It gives you a list of books. It gives you list of other data. It gives you what it looks like as an ebook. The different titles, like Percy Jackson is not the title of the book, but it has like multiple books in the series. So Sea of Monsters is one of them. The Battle of Labyrinth, the Titan's Curse, and like a bunch of other books right there. Okay, so it gives you all of that. ID on the Goodreads, ID on Wikidata, ID on Amazon, ID on other websites. Gives you a subject, like what would be the keywords slash subjects that this belongs to. It's a fiction, it's fantasy, it's Greek mythology, it's juvenile fiction, and it has father son relationship in it. There's a relationship with Hades there, Greek gods, adventure, like yeah, I'd say a lot of things. Okay, place, Sea of Monsters, some reason is Bermuda Triangle, it seems. uh, the persons in the book, like let's just say there are lots and lots of details, but out of this we actually want to strip out most of the things and just focus solely on what did we have in our template. Let's see, we want to focus solely on the book ID, the book cover, uh, the book details, which has the title, the author, the year, the number of pages, descriptions if available, and that's it. Like these are the things that we want from the book. Now you would notice one thing. I said that there will be two APIs which we want to use for this session. So one of them is of course the search that we just saw. The other one would be actually the cover. Okay, so first of all, a very humble request, and we should definitely follow it, that let's not crawl the API. Secondly, how do I say this? So you download a book. Of course, you need the cover, but that is a secondary API request that we will make. Okay. So that is kind of a difference here, that we will search for a book, download a book, then we'll show placeholder image, okay, which is this particular image of like 120 cross 180, and we'll show this placeholder image. When a user clicks on that image, it will go and fetch the cover of the book from this covers API. Okay, so that is, I think, a very good enough and brief introduction to what we are going to build right now. The HTML CSS is done. We'll start with JavaScript. Okay, now you can focus solely on screen again. Let me know if it's not zoomed in enough for anyone, but I think it should be. Okay. Oh, before we go ahead, what are we going to achieve? Okay, or at least what I'm going to focus on. So number one would be, of course, searching for a book, right? So searching for a book is the first priority. So for that, we'll use the fetch API, which is kind of built in JavaScript, I would say, right now. So no external libraries or anything for fetching data. So searching for books by using it's an inbuilt library. Yeah. Uh, that's the first thing. Second thing would be, if you notice the actions, there would be this button of marking or deleting it, like removing it from library or adding it to library. Okay, a button like that. So user will be able to click on a button to add it to their library. And when we say add to the library, what exactly would happen is, uh, that in the applications there is something called as indexed DB, which we had a brief discussion about. So the book will be added to indexed DB. A quick overview, that indexed DB remains there unless a user comes and actually clears it from application tab. So what IndexedDB does is it actually stores on your file system. Okay, so on your hard drive. So if you have like 1 TB hard drive, we actually Google search this, that IndexedDB is equivalent to like 60% space of your hard drive space. So if you have 1 TB, so you can have 600 GB of data in IndexedDB. Okay, so yeah, that's what we had searched. I remembered like it was 80%, but some answers said it's 60, so let's just say 70. uh, so yeah, so when someone clicks on the add to library button, it will basically get added to the index DB, and you'll be able to view your library by going on to this my library page, not page, tab, which unfortunately doesn't work right now because there's no click functionality. So in the my library, then you can see all the books that you have added. You can then mark those books as, have you read it, or is it like pending, like to read, like unread, it's still unread. Okay, so you can add books to library, separate feature. Once it is in your library, you can also segregate it out as mark as read, or like, or let it remain unread. So default behavior would be every book will be unread. Whichever books you have read or you complete reading, mark it as read. Uh, and you'll be also able to remove books from your library. Example, let's say some book that you don't want to read. Example, my physics book, H.C. Verma. Never wanted to read it. Nice book. I don't like it. So maybe I've added it in my library and I want to remove it. So yeah, that would be also a feature. So the key concepts that I'm looking to cover in this session would be how to manipulate the DOM, okay, which is the whole document, which we had discussed before. Promises and async await, uh, cover about IndexedDB, cover about like how to add APIs, and finally also cover about templates, okay, the template that we have created so gracefully. Okay, cover about that, talk about that. So these are the things that I'm going to focus on. Okay, now this time, I promise we'll start writing code. Okay, let's start by creating some constants at the top of the file. So some constants, because we'll keep reusing this again and again, so it's good idea to have it as a constant. So the first one would be the API endpoint for searching data, which we know kind of looks like this. So https openlibrary.org/search.json, and everything after that is like a query param. Okay, so a question q equals to something. So this is called as query param. Now you can read more about this, or at least view what does a what does a URL have by going into your console and searching for window.location and hitting enter. So if you hit enter, it tells you what is the host and the host name, what is the actual URL, what is the origin, what is the path name, and what did this search for. So this last part. So a URL is basically built up of what is the origin, what is the path, and what is the search. Okay, so these three things. So the search part is what we called as the query, and in that you can kind of dive more deep and say what are the query parameters here. Okay, so the query parameters in this case are, first is q equals to Percy plus Jackson. That's the first query parameter. The second query parameter is the limit, which specifies how many books or how many results do you want in return. The third query parameter is language in this case, okay, which is set as English, ENG. Also tells you what is the protocol. So if you, let's say, or you are on a HTTP website, then in that case the protocol would all of course be HTTP right here. Okay, so actually, still three things: origin, path name, and search. Okay, so in our case, the origin plus path name is what is our base of the search API, and everything after that would basically be the query part. So this is our search API. Then similarly for covers, what does the API look like? So it looks like this: http s covers.openlibrary.org/b, and then everything after that is basically uh, our search parameter. Okay, so if, let's say, I copy this and I go over to this one, so this is a book cover, and this is a -s, which is small, but you can also go for -l, which is the large, and they also have -m, which is the medium, of course. uh, and it is the particular sadness of lemon cake book. Why is lemon cake sad? I'm curious. Okay, so once again, what is our origin, what is our path name? So even though we actually tried to go for this thing, it kind of did a redirect. Okay, and it reached over to this one, and this is our search. But in our case, we don't have to do that, because we know that this will internally do a redirect and it will take us to some new website. Okay, so this is what I search for, but it redirects to some other, like this particular other website. Okay, which is fine. In our case, the covers API will now be not this, everything up to B. Okay, so this is our book covers API. Then the third thing that I want to create is DB name, which is the database name, and this is the name for our index DB. So I'm going to call it library DB. How unique. Uh, then index DB is very interesting. So I will actually uh, request you all to go and read a bit more. But one of the things of IndexedDB is that it needs to have a version specified. Okay, Without version, it does not really work. It needs to know what is this version of uh, database, and how do we add to this, how do we like, sorry, not add to this, how do we update the schema. So you can think of schema as, let's say, columns. Okay, so how do you add or remove columns from a table? uh, so to do that, you need to specify version. So that is why we'll define a version which is initially going to be 1. uh, what else? Oh, store name. So we'll define a store name, and that is going to be equal to books, and const max results is going to be like, we'll not overwhelm the server right here, we'll only query what we need. Now the first question, or I guess a question that you might have, is what's the DB name and what is the store name? So to do that, let me quickly show you a very nice example. So in this case, if this is my library DB, okay, so this is my database. Okay, in this case, this is my database, and my store name is right here, which is called as books. Okay, then my column names would be here, which is going to be my keys. Okay, so let's say an ID, name of the book, or like, let's say, what do we call it in HTML? We call it book title, right? So book title, or actually the parent is book details. Yeah, so let's go via that. So book details, and in underneath this we'll have like book title, we'll have book author, book year, book pages, and book description. And now if I kind of go and try to merge this, so this is a very high level overview of our database table. Uh, and there would be a book actions column as well. Okay, this is a much realistic looking. So this is our table in the database. So in the books table, uh, this is what things would look like if you have to imagine it via a spreadsheet. So let's say these two will get merged, this will get merged, and now if I just ensure that everything is properly aligned or something, give it a color. Why am I doing this? I'm just enjoying it. Okay, perfect. So this is what it would look like in terms of a sheet, and this is how we are going to store it in IndexedDB. Okay, so in this case, all your column names are going to be your keys, and everything that comes below here would be your values. Okay, so yeah, just to give you a very high level overview. Now let's say tomorrow I want to add a new column here, uh, like on the right side of this, which I want to call as I don't know, something contributor. Okay, uh, or let's say, is it ebook? Okay, so some books are like only physical copies, some of them are ebooks. So if I want to add a new column, this will disrupt any existing data that was there. Okay, so let's say there was a data here, and something 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 something, and yes. Okay, so there was this data here, and tomorrow for some reason the requirement is that add a new column here, which in a table, yes, you can add. But what happens to the data here? Is it going to remain empty, which is null / undefined? Or do you have some idea of how will you pre-populate it? Or the terminology is that how do you do wait, what's the terminology? Like kind of a transaction on the database. Okay, a migration strategy. Yes, that's the better term there. So what is the migration strategy if you want to add a new column in the database? So that is why this DB version comes in. So DB version tells that if you want to upgrade from DB version 1 to DB version 2, what is the migration strategy there? So if you add this column, what happens to the existing rows in the data? What is the value there? What is the default value that goes in there? Or do you want to like go through every row, populate it in some way, like, you know, let's say for this it's a no, for other row maybe it's a yes. So do you want to go through each row in the table, populate it? And if you want to, yes, definitely do that, and then you'll upgrade the version to now be DB version 2. Okay, so yeah, that is my 2 cents on DB versions, tables, databases. So you understand what's a database. Now a database in this case can have multiple tables in it. Okay, every table will have columns, of course. So in this case, let's say there's books and there's books v2. Okay, like after the version upgrade, books v3. Or even like, let's say you want to drop a table, then what happens? You'll again increment the version number to version 3, where let's say this column does not exist anymore. How do you delete something? Oh, yeah, there we go. This does not exist anymore. So yeah, that is about migration strategy and a bunch of other things. Okay, let's move on to the next bit. Now the next bit would be how do we access elements in a DOM? So we can see the elements of our DOM right here. In my case, the one thing that I'm very much interested in is inside the search section, and I am interested in the search input. Okay, this is the input box where user is going to type something. So I'm interested in knowing uh, what does this search input look like. Now there is one thing. Uh, okay, interesting. I'm pretty sure there is a console that comes right here as well at the bottom sometimes. Don't remember now. Anyways, so if I want to target a particular element, which in this case is the search input, we had seen that you could do that by going into document, which is basically the whole page, and then doing a dot. And we know that this search input is an ID. So you could do something like document.get element by ID, and IDs are supposed to be unique. So there should be only one of this search input. And if you hit enter, that will return you the HTML element, okay, which is this one. So we had seen that. So now we know how to get one. And you could define a variable, like let's say in my case I do a const a equals this thing. And now I can do a dot text content equals hello, or in this case I think it would be a dot target dot value or something like that. I'll have to, I think this just value, I think that should exist. Yeah, a dot value, and if I set this to hello, then in that case, if I do a dot value, it returns me the value. So whatever user has typed here will be returned. Yep, there we go. So yeah, I could do a dot value. Yep. So this is how you can refer to something in the DOM by doing, let's say, if it has an ID, then by doing get element by ID. And then if it's an input box, you can get whatever user has typed inside the input box by doing dot value on it. Okay. So first, let's kind of define all our elements. And since I have created it, I kind of know all my elements. So search input is going to be document dot get element by ID. The first one that I'm interested in is search input. Let me minimize this thing and I can open my HTML, and on the right hand side I go here, just squeeze this in a bit. So the first one, yep, that's done, the input box, which is the search input. Then the next one that I'm interested in is the search button. Okay, so I'm going to create a const search button equals to document dot get element by ID, and in this case it's search button. Then what else? I'm not focusing on the filtering part right now. This is where our results will go, right? So I want to actually focus on that const results body. This is where things would go. So get element by ID would be results body, library body, which would be document dot get element by ID, which would be library dash body. What else? Loading element, const loading element, that is going to be document dot get element by ID, which is called as loading. There's a error element that we have, so that is again very similar, and it is called error dash message. And now that I'm tired, I'm going to copy paste this a bunch of times. Okay, now what is the next thing? We have a search view button, and that is going to be search dash view dash button. The next thing is library view button, and that is of course going to be library view button. Okay, the next thing would be search section, and that is going to be search dash section. Then we will have a library section, which would be library dash section. And then the book row template, and that would be book row template. And now we can kind of do a very quick console log right here, where we put in every element. Okay, just so that you can actually see it on screen. Okay, not everything, because that's a lot, but let's say these four. I think that should be good enough. So now if I go over to our page, do a quick reload, there we go. That's our book row template, our results body, our search button, and this. Okay, and you can see all the things that exist inside that. Okay, uh, what does input have? It has value, so that should be somewhere inside here. This is only till O. If you want more, then you'll have to, yeah, click on that, and there we go, value. Okay, that's a input. What about a button? A button, it has so many things. It should also have a, yeah, disabled, trackable, all these things. The inner HTML, what's the button called? The inner text, search. So, yep, these are all the things that exist on the button. Okay. So, yeah, I think that's good enough to see that you've kind of, yeah, we got all the things. What next? Let's focus on the advanced search fields. So in the advanced search, we have, like, I'll copy this over. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 things in our advanced search. The first one is author input, whose ID is just author. Then we have the language selection, whose ID is language. Then we have subject input. The ID is subject. And finally, we have the publisher input. The ID is publisher. Okay, so that's all our inputs from the page. Now, the next one is to set something default. So when the page loads for the first time, we want to set the default language to be English. Okay, so right now, what's the default language? Any. So I want to set that to English. And how do I do that? So multiple ways to do it. Uh, let's say, what is our language select? So if I do a console dot log here, or actually I just do a language select. So there it goes. Okay. Because we have loaded the JavaScript, all the variables that we have written here will be visible in the console, will be accessible in the console. So now if I do language select dot value and set that to ENG, there you go. The drop down actually changed to English. So let me reload this. It is currently any, but if I set to English, ENG, it becomes English. How do I get this ENG? That is because in the select, inside the options, every value has this short form. Okay, so I'm basically saying that for the drop down, set the value to be this particular thing. Okay, so that's how we set it. Now the question is, how do we know that the page has loaded? Because what is actually page load? That must be a question that you might have. That what do you mean by page load? So let's think from a browser's perspective. Okay, let me clear all of this and let me do a empty cache and hard reload. So you see there was this pending where it tried to download the library.html. That's the first thing it downloads. Then it tries for the styles.css. That is the second thing in my actually headers. Okay, if you go in the head part, style.css and library.css. So then it tries to download library.css, and then it goes for the library.js, which is the last thing in my HTML, which is all the way towards the bottom in the body. Okay, so that's the last thing that gets loaded. So once all the loading is complete, the window, which in this case is this library page slash website, uh, it sends back, or actually you can kind of choose to listen to something called as a DOM content loaded event. Now you can read more about it here. Okay, so what is a DOM content loaded? So the idea is that once the page has fully loaded in that, and you want to do something after the loading is complete, then you can kind of do a window dot add event listener. Here you go, add event listener, DOM content loaded, and then you can choose that, hey, when this loading is complete, I want to do something. Okay, so in our case, we want to, once the loading is complete of the page, we want to set the language to English. Now let me share this link in the chat. There you go. Okay. Okay, let's continue. So I said that this event is available on the window. So I will do window dot add event listener, and oh, the first option is DOM content loaded. So appends an event listener for events whose type. Oh, not a very great description. I think the one on the MDN docs is much better understood. So DOM content loaded. And now in our case, I am going to say that once this loading is complete, then put the language dot value, language select dot value equals to English. Okay, this is what I want to do. So now if I go over to library page and I clear cache and I do a empty cache and hard reload, it's too quick. Okay, but ideally this is what happened. I can also do a quick console log here. If I want a colorful console, I can go for a one console.one DOM content has loaded. Okay, so now if I reload, DOM content has loaded, coming from line number 26. Okay, there we go. So yeah, once that is loaded, then we set the language value to that. So I think that is a neat trick whenever you want. And this is not just JavaScript. Like you write React or anything else, you can kind of add these event listeners even in like React world. So don't think that, oh, if I have to do this, I have to do this in plain JavaScript. That is not the case. You can do it in any JavaScript framework. Okay, let's move on. Okay, next let's focus on IndexedDB. Okay, so for IndexedDB, it's going to be a bit tricky, but just follow along. Just try to, yeah, I would say I'll write some stuff. Keep an eye out for it. It's okay if you don't understand it yet, because once you see it in action, it becomes much more easier. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is define a variable, which would be, let's say, since it's a database, I'm going to call it DB. So this is our database variable. Okay. Now, the first thing that I want to do is to create a function called as initDB, which will be initializing the IndexedDB, right? So let's create const initDB. And in this case, we have to first request to open a database connection. So why a request? Because, well, the browser needs to go and think of it like as a user, you have to first open your inspect element, then go into application tab, and then go into index.db. Okay, so a very bad example, but the idea is kind of similar, that from browser's perspective, you will call on index.db the open method. So I'm going to say index.db dot open, and it needs two things. It needs the name of the database that you want to open and the version number of the database you want to open. So in our case, the name of the database is saved in db underscore name variable, and the version is saved in the db underscore not name, db underscore version variable. Okay, so that is done. And let's say for some reason this database name does not exist, or there is some problem. Maybe it has corrupted, maybe it is uh, it's been deleted, or something or the other. So we can say that request.onError. If it fails to load, and in that case uh, something will happen, and we can then show error. Now show error, uh, what do I want to do? I could add a function for that, or I can just show it in console. Okay, let's do it console dot error for now, and I will say database error, and then do a event dot target dot error. Okay, okay, now the next thing that we want to focus on is called as on upgrade needed. So upgrade needed is fired when an attempt was made to open a database with a version number higher than its current version. Okay, so in our case, we will use this to actually create the database if it does not exist. So let's do that. We'll say that request dot on upgrade needed event, and we'll say const db. Now this db is separate from this db. How and why are they not clashing? If you have that question, give me 1 second and I will help you. If a not db dot object then in that case create object store, and that would have our store name and our key. First one would be key, which key path I think it's called, and that would be key. Okay, okay, I think this should be good. And now if this is successful, then we should do a request dot on success. That's event. And now I'm calling the outside DB, this one. I can call this actually inner DB. And outside one, DB equals to event dot target dot result. And then we'll call another function. But for now, let's just console log success. Info. Okay. And to call a function, all we need to do is give its name. So we can do init db right here. Let's go over. I'm going to close some other stuff, and there we go. Index db, library db, books, key path, key, and value. Let me first delete this, and then we'll start from there. Okay, initially no database. Now if I reload the page, suddenly it creates one. Okay, the library DB, which is the name, and inside that it creates the table. And this is where the key path is going, and success. Okay, so first thing, what is, if I had the same variable here and I had the same variable here, then how are they not clashing? That is, if you're new to JavaScript, that may be the first question that you'll ask. And since this is a beginner level, I am going to explain it. So this is where something called as scoping comes into picture. Now, what is scoping? Now you have three kinds of initializers or data types, not data types. You have three ways of declaring a variable. You have something called as a var, you have something called as a let, and you have something called as a const. Now the idea of const is you declare it once, you cannot change it. Example, you do a const my name equals ut, and now if I print my name, comes out as ut. I want to update my name to mlh, and you're trying to assign value to a constant variable, which is not allowed. So there it fails. But let's say I want to go for let my name equals ut, and I can reassign value to it. So now if I go like, okay, I want to reassign the name to mlh, and now if I print my name, that is the latest version, which is the mlh. Okay, so const let, you can, one, you cannot assign value again, one, you can reassign value. Things change a bit when you talk about objects, but for the beginner level, let's consider only this. What about var? So let me reload this. Var my name equals ut, and now I want to reassign it to mlh, and it works. So var and let, you can kind of say that, oh, they work in a very similar manner. The difference is bubbling up. Okay, so if you define a variable with var, let's say you define it here, not here, let's say you define it inside, you can kind of say that it becomes a globally scoped variable. It will go towards the top of the file. Now const and let, these are block scoped. Okay, they are accessible only where you have defined them. Okay, now in my case, if the let db is defined on line number 29, and as you can see, it is not wrapped inside anything, it is kind of out there, out and about, so it can be accessed by anything here. Now if I take this from here and I put it inside the window.add event listener, now this thing is going to kind of complain here that you have declared a variable, but you are not reading the value of it. Let me actually go one step more in, and I will say that function A is here, and that's where my variable is being defined. Okay. And application index.db delete. Okay. So keeps saying that this variable is declared, but the value is never read for this one. And actually, let me also do one last thing. Let me try to console log db in initdb. Perfect. Yeah, there we go. So now it says that db is not defined. Like, it's basically saying, what are you talking about? What is this db variable that you keep talking about? So because this is inside this particular function, okay, this function A. But if I take it out from here and I put it right here on line number, let's say 26, now db is undefined. There is a value, but that value is undefined, but it can access db. Okay, that's the interesting bit, that it can now access the database, the db variable. So the scoping is currently, like, you can say, you can think of scoping as, is it outside in the file or is it inside somewhere? Okay, that's what you need to focus on with uh, block scoped variables. Const is also a block scoped variable. Let is also a block scoped variable. And the block is, think of a block as the parent box, where, like, where is, who is the nearest parent to this variable is what is your block. So in, if it's on line 27, if db variable is defined on line 27, the nearest parent is the whole file. So it will be available anywhere in the file. But if I take it out from here and put it inside A, then suddenly, what is the nearest box? The nearest box is this function A. Okay. So that is why it is not exactly available inside the init db. And now, if I make this a var db and then I try this, this happens. So now my question to you is, what exactly, now this is what I want you to research on, that where exactly would var come in, and how is var also block scope? Yeah, that's kind of a question for you all. Okay, so yeah, definitely do a quick research or something about it, and then let me, like, answer the question whenever you get time. uh, okay, so that's about scoping. What I was doing, I was trying to define the variable. So let db is right here. This will now be initially undefined, and this is our creating a database. Perfect. So this is all done. And now if I do a db here and I hit enter, there we go. That's our database, which is library db, and our object store name, which is our tables, you can say, and the table is books. Okay, and I can do a db dot these many things, transaction version. Let's say I do version, that should return me that this is version 1. db dot name, that should return me the database name. Okay, so moving on to the next bit. What should I focus on next? So now we have created a database. We have seen how exactly to create it. Now let's implement searching of books. Okay, yes. So now const search books equals asynchronously. Now this is the next best term to actually understand. What is asynchronous and also what is the fetch API? So you can find more details about fetch API here, and the fetch API, uh, it is for basically requesting a resource. Okay, so everything that you see on the internet, let's say in this case, you can make a request to get that data, right? So whenever, and the best way to actually understand that is, let's say if I open their website called as example.org, I think it's called. Yep, there we go. So example.org, and if I go clear this and I do a empty cache hard reload, example.org, if I click on that, on the headers, it says you have tried to use the get request method to fetch this resource or get this data. And when you tried to get the data, this is what it returned. Okay, this is the data that came back. So that is your request URL and that is your method. And since this was successful, there is your response code, the HTTP response code, which is 200. Okay, so this did not fail. But on the other hand, the next one, which was favicon.ico, you tried to get that on this request URL. Unfortunately, this was not found. And so the HTTP code in this case is 404 not found. So that is why they can't see a favicon here. In our case, we had added a favicon. So our favicon always comes back successfully. If I clear empty cache and hard reload, yep, our favicon always comes back successfully 200. Okay, theirs does not, unfortunately, which is fine. But if I do a reload again, you see that status code, which was initially 200, has now changed to 304. Now what does that mean? That you tried to get the data, which is nice, but nothing changed. So the browser actually is being smart here, and it's like, you know what, you tried to get the data but nothing changed, so I'm not going to fetch the data, I'm not going to go and get it again. I know it has not been modified. So that is why the 304 not modified, which is again a kind of a successful response in a way, you can say. Okay, now fetching can take time. It depends on, like, in physical sense, if you have to think about it, fetching a resource from some other place can take time. Now, in case of, let's say, example.org, the first resource, it took 449 milliseconds, which is very fast if you think about it, but it took some time. So it's not a synchronous operation where you do this, then you do that, then you do this, then you do that. Like JavaScript execution line by line is kind of a synchronous operation. Like, at least in our case, it will go through the code, or even in like HTML, as I had said, that it goes through line by line and it starts to add what comes in the head, what comes in the body, and then when it's loading the head, it encounters the CSS, loads the CSS, uh, then it comes towards the bottom, it loads the JavaScript. So it does kind of a line by line execution synchronously, one after the other. Even in here, okay, defining these variables. It will first define the search API, then covers API, then DB name, and it's going to go very fast. It will do that, but it would go very fast. So you wouldn't exactly know how much time it took to define the first and the second variable. But yeah, line by line. So it's synchronous operation, one after the other. But fetching a data from another server, which can take 449 milliseconds or sometimes 449 seconds, okay. For example, if I go for let me see, if I clear all of this out, and why do I not remember? Dan Brown. Okay. Okay. This. And now just keep looking at the data. It took 2.76 seconds to actually fetch just 10 data. Okay. I've limited it to 10. This is how much time it took. So from a user's perspective, what are they going to do for 10, like 2.6 seconds, which is actually still very less. Let's go for 100 this time. And now let's search. Okay. So meanwhile, what you can see is on the top, there is this loading. And now the user is sitting here for like 9 seconds, 10 seconds, 10.68 seconds, 11 seconds, uh, like 10.68 plus 2. So 12, 13 seconds just staring at the screen. So now this operation is called as an asynchronous operation. Okay. Fetching is asynchronous operation because you want to uh, do this kind of not one after the other, but tell the user or tell your code in a way. Now, this is all from a thought process, from a physical aspect perspective. Okay. I'm not saying this is what happens in the code, but I'm saying that from a thought process, you can think of asynchronous as that, there is something that is going to happen here, which will take a bit of a time. So meanwhile, what we want the user to, or at least the next bit of code, is to wait for that operation to finish. Okay. Like give it some time. Don't like rush over to the next bit. So that's a very high level, very crude explanation of asynchronous operations and async and await. Okay. Where at one point you're saying, wait for this resource to load. Okay. Don't rush, don't hurry. Okay. So fetch can take 10 seconds. So we want to wait till it finishes loading. So yeah, that's a bit of an explanation right there. So in our search books is going to search for the book, right? And that can take some time. So we'll have to wait for the results to come back. But before we wait for the results to come back, step one is to actually uh, build the query. Yeah, that's one way to put it. Step one is to actually build the query to like which data will be fetched. Yeah. So let's try and build a query. Also, you can read more about in depth about async and await. Well, there's nothing much depth there, but let's say this one. Hmm. I'm thinking if there's a better explanation somewhere. Mm, okay, can't really find anything. Uh, Another explanation that, like, okay, let me give it a try. Another way to explain, or at least go a bit more into depths of async await, would be number one, to create a async function. You could, if it's a function that you want to use, the function keyword, you could do async function, the name of the function. So in our case, it would be, let's say, ABC. And then inside here, you could do a return. Okay. Now remember that async returns a promise. And we had kind of touched a bit about promises before. What is a promise? A promise is, I think the word says, again, from the word perspective, I'm not saying this is what it is, but promise is uh, a special syntax in JavaScript where you tell it, like, it, if there is something which is wrapped in a promise, it will have three states, which is, number one, it is either resolved, or it is rejected, or it is in a kind of a pending state. Okay. So yeah. So now, whenever you make a promise, initially you start by, the promise goes into the pending state. The initial state is the pending state. That, let's say, you promise a friend to give them 100 bucks. So the initial state is the pending state where you have not given the 100 bucks. And then, depending on what your mood is on the day, we will either fulfill that promise and give them 100 bucks, or you will reject that promise and not give them 100 bucks. So yeah, that's a very crude explanation of a promise. Now async await always returns a promise. Okay. So now, if we go into a bit more detail about that, async await will return a promise. Now, that basically means that using this syntax, you are kind of saying that whatever is inside this function, it will either get fulfilled or it will get rejected. Now, when you define a function as async, then you don't have to use the await keyword inside. But if you want to use await keyword inside the function, then the function needs to be async. Okay. So if you have, like, you can go back in the video on YouTube later and just listen this again carefully. Now, what happens with the await part? So the await part is basically a way to say that it actually pauses the function execution until the promise has settled. So remember, as I said, that we want to wait for 10 seconds for the website to fetch the data. So meanwhile, it will tell the function that don't rush, wait for this to come back. Now it's possible that it does not come back, the data does not come back. So in that case, after some time, there would be a timeout, or maybe the data comes back and it is not the data that you wanted, or let's say it failed. Okay. Then the server will send a 404. In that case, the promise is, let's say, you have written some logic that the promise gets rejected. The next bit of the function would be executed after that. Okay. So once the data from promise has come back, then the next bits are executed. Now with a promise, there's another thing that you could do is you can kind of chain the responses, which is by using the syntax which you sometimes see. uh, like in promises, you can do promise chaining, not in async await. I'm saying in promises you could do a promise chaining where you say that promise to return, like, give me 100 bucks. If you give me 100 bucks, then I will be able to buy uh, a laptop for MLH hackathon, then I'll participate in MLH hackathon, then I'll try to build a project, then I'll probably win the hackathon. So there's the dot then syntax, promise chaining syntax. But what if in the first place you did not give them $100? So then you have kind of rejected, and there is no dot then. You will have a dot catch. Okay, where, oh, you did not give me $100. All my dot thens are meaningless slash useless, uh, and so that, you know, your promise chaining kind of fails right there. You are left with the catch part of it. And you also have the syntax called as finally, which is that regardless of whether you give them $100 or you don't give them $100, finally your friend is going to remain your friend. So that is your finally part of the promise chaining. Now this dot then that I was saying, you could replace that with the await part. Okay, so that is where await comes into picture. I think that was a pretty big slash decent explanation. There is a question in the chat: is it recorded anywhere? It is recorded on YouTube, so you can definitely watch it on YouTube later. You can watch it on YouTube right now because we are live on YouTube. And I think this is the correct link. Okay, so I think that's enough about promises and chaining and async await. Let's write some code to actually see it in action. But as I said, before we actually use the fetch syntax, we first have to build our input box. Like, you know, whatever the user has typed, we need to get that input. So the first thing that I'm going to do is const search term, and that is equal to the search input that we had seen, the input box in this case. So this search input, and on that we have a dot value that we know exists. So I can kind of do that here. Let's say GHW. So then if I do search dot value, it is GHW, but I can put a space here. Okay, and now if I do this, this is what the response comes back as. Like, the value has space and then GHW. Okay, I don't want that space, so I'm going to do something called as trim on both ends, which will remove any additional space from both ends. So if I have this, and if I don't do the trim, this is what the response, like this is what the user has typed in the box. Don't really need the extra spacing, so we can do a trim. So that is what I'm going to do right here. So trim, and then we have used the syntax before, which is if not search term. So what if user has not typed anything? In that case, just return. Okay, don't do anything, just return. Now to build the query parameter, you could do params equals to new URL search params. Okay, you can read more about it on MDN. If I'm going too slow, I won't be able to finish this. So I'm going to take a bit of a pace here, but you can read about that on MDN. Then I'm going to say append. Append is basically to add. Okay, append, the word actually translates to add. So append q comma search term. Okay, and why are we doing this? Because if you remember, in the fetch you have q equals to and then something. Okay, so the append is basically saying that add this q, and the value is going to be whatever is the search term that the user has added. And what about the plus? Would the user need to add a plus? No, you don't really. The user won't need to do that, because that is what our URL params, URL search params would kind of do for us. I'm searching if there is an example here. Nope, not really. Anyways, let's move ahead. Params dot append limit, and we will say that it would be max results that we have set as 10, but it needs to be a string. It cannot be a number. So we are going to convert it to a string. And finally, I'm also going to default to the language as English for now, but you can change it. Okay. Now, any additional search things, like we have those additional parameters as well, right? Which is author name, genre, publisher, all those things. So we can do that const additional params. Like you could technically, of course, do this params dot append. What we have author, and then that could be author input dot value dot trim. Okay, you could do this, or you could do a slightly functional way, which is we can define a object. And what is an object in JavaScript? Like there are so many things which are object, but in our case, the object that I'm talking about is basically a key value pair. The key in this case is author, and the value, like colon value in this case, is going to be the author input, like whatever the user has typed inside this input box. So that dot value dot trim, removing the extra space. Next is the key is going to be subject, and the value is going to be subject input dot value dot trim. Then the key is going to be publisher. The value is going to be the publisher input dot value dot trim. Okay, so these are basically all the input boxes that were remaining. So these three input boxes. And now I can do this thing programmatically, like do this thing in the sense that doing something very similar. We can do object dot entries of additional params. Okay, so actually I should have access to additional params, apparently not, block scoped and stuff. So let me try this thing. Yes, there we go. So object dot entries of additional params gives me the array. Now what I want to do is object dot entries of additional params, and now for each of them, okay, for each I can say key comma value. Yes, I want to actually do a console dot warn key comma value. I close this bracket, I close this bracket, and that should be it. And there we go. Author, subject, publisher. Okay, cool. So let's do that right here. Object dot this, and then for each, I could say key comma value, And in this case, I want to actually check if there is a value. I don't want to send empty strings, not that I don't want to, but I know for a fact that this does not accept empty strings here in the URL. It throws an error because I've tried that before. So that is why I'm going to add a condition to check, like, if there is a value, if value exists, in that case, params dot append key value. Okay, for that particular key, add the value. Meanwhile, another thing that we need to create later is to show loading. So I can add that here as a comment, show loading. Okay. What else? Okay. Now, so why am I saying show loading? Because once the user does like all the input and they have hit the search button, then we will show a spinner here, a loader here, saying that, oh, we are fetching the data, we are fetching the data, we are fetching the data. Hold on, wait. So the next syntax that I want to show you is called as try, catch, and finally. Okay. So it looks like try and then something, catch and then something, and finally and then something. So this is the syntax for try, catch, and finally. So the try basically means what it means in English, to try something. So in this case, inside the try, we will try to fetch the data, okay, from the OpenLibrary API. If for some reason that fails, that error will be caught, okay, caught by this catch. So that is why this one also has this catch error. And then once you have the error, you can console log it or show it to the user. And finally, as the name suggests, regardless of whether it was a success or a failure, we want to do something else, which actually we want to show, like, the loader that we will start showing here. Okay, show loading true, that should finally here become show loading false. Right. So regardless of, like, if we have the data, of course we don't want to show the loader if we have the data, and if we have the error, then we want to show the error. Why will we keep showing the loading? Okay, because we already have the error. So that's kind of a difference, not a difference, that's kind of the reason why we'll have the finally. Okay, now let's start with very basic, which is console log and library search for, and let's console log the what is being searched. Now we will use the backticks here because we want to give the full URL in here. So the full URL is made up of two parts. One is the search API and then a question mark and then the params that we created, okay, that we keep appending to the URL search params. So that goes in here. So now this should actually print it out on the console. Next is const response is going to be await. Okay, await, which basically means wait, and then we'll use the fetch API, which kind of exists, and we'll pass this exact same thing because here we are console logging it, but now we are actually passing it to the fetch API or using it to get the data. Notice the question mark, that is important. Why? Because we see that when we do the request, there is this first part, which is the search API, and there's the second part, which is the params, and there is this question mark in between. So we need to add that. Okay. Now, in this case, we can kind of do a quick check saying that if not response dot okay. Now, response kind of has some options available on it. Response is has blob, body, okay, type, status text, redirected, headers, form data, like basically a bunch of things. So if response is okay, then we want to do something. But in our case, we are saying if response is not okay. Okay. So the exclamation initially. So not a response okay, which means response is not okay. In that case, we want to throw a new error. Okay. And the error will be like, this is what we are basically kind of, you can think that we want to, if let's say we have to show it in console. Yeah, that's how I would think about it. Status uh, is response dot status. Okay, so let me actually copy paste this, and I also want to do a console dot error. Okay, now if you see this, there is a highlight, like it's not highlighted and it says unreachable code detected. Because once you throw an error, you're basically saying that return or come outside of this condition. Okay, go outside. This is very similar to this part, where if there is no search term, return outside. But if there is a search term, then you go ahead. In this case, we are saying if response is not okay, throw an error and come outside of this condition, this whole function. But now, we also want to console log, so we'll have to do the console log first and throw the second. You can read more about throw. On MDN. MDN must be getting like a lot of hits from me sharing their website so many times. Okay, anyways, going ahead. So that is a throw new error. There is like, you can also have a throw error actually, by the way. This will also work out. But as you saw in the description, that you should use a throw error when, like, the small error, when the error is basically a variable that was previously defined. But throw new error is basically a new error object. But also this works. So inside here, you can do throw error. Okay, that works because this error is basically this variable. If you say throw new error, then you are basically saying that I want to create my own new error, and you can pass it message and options. Okay, but the third thing is you can also do throw error, and this also works. Okay, yeah, so that is one thing. So okay, if not response dot okay, then we are doing this. And if we now go below, now we are saying that const data is equals to await response dot json. So this first part, we were waiting for this fetch API to return a response, which we stored in the response. In the next bit, if supposing that there was a response, then that is good. If there was not a response, of course, you will come outside of this. But if let's say there was a response, then now we are saying that, hey, convert that response to a JSON. I'm not going to explain JSON right now, but actually from the result, you can see that it says that the response is .json. Okay. Yeah, converting it to JSON. What else? I can now the response. I want to actually ensure that I only show 10 results. So let me do a const limited docs equals data dot it. This is what it looks like. So that is why I know. And now I'm going to slice from the 0th response up to max results. Okay. And then we will display the search result. Okay. Now inside the catch, we will show error. To user. And inside the finally, we will we'll make sure that the show loading becomes false. Okay. So that is our idea. So right now we are not using the limited docs. We want to create a new function for showing or displaying the result. So let's do that. Const display search results equals, no spaces in between, of course, equals, it takes in a books as a parameter. So this is going to be a function. So first thing, if not books, or it's an array, but the length is 0. So let's say books dot length triple equals to 0. If this is the case, then in that case we'll show error, and let's just return outside, come outside of this. But let's say like initially you searched for a book and then you showed an error. Now you search for the book again and somehow it returns the result. Then we want to clear the error first. So that's what we'll write in a bit. And then we'll say results body dot inner HTML. We'll set that to empty. Okay. Now we'll say that books, which is the array, which is the input, for each. So looping over that. Now we'll say book for each book, and for each index is going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Let's do const row equals create book row, which is a function that we'll create that will take in a book and index plus 1, because indexing starts from 0. So we don't want to show 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We want to start with 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So index plus 1. And the third parameter that it will take is going to be, is this a library view or is this a search view? Because we have two tabs in our project. We have a search books and we have a my library. So is it a library view or is it a search view? So that is why I'm going to, like, this is the function that I'm going to create in a bit. But these are the three things it will take. And now I'll say results body dot append child row. Okay. So what would this do? This will actually add a new row in the results body. That's the best way to understand it for now. Now let's create the create book row. So const create book row. Now this function, which will take in a book, as I said, it will take in an ID and it will take it an input, which is it a library view or not? So is library view. Now I can actually set a default, which is in this case, if suppose this parameter, this third parameter is not defined, then in that case, set it to false. I can do that as well. So that's what I'm doing right here. Now the next thing is the templates. Okay, you remember the templates? So we'll work with templates. The first step is to clone the template. So the template, if you remember, as I said, it exists, but it does not show on the page. And the idea of templates is that you take a template, and I'd shown this in the previous video, that this template is basically how one row would look like. Okay, as I showed you on the sheets as well, that how a single row will look like is what this template is about. So we will first clone the template for adding a new row. So I'm going to say const row equals book row template dot content dot clone node, and set this to true. What is clone node? It is going to clone a particular, like in this case, the whole of the template. Again, MD and docs. You can read more about it. This. Now there is this problem. That clone node may lead to duplicate element IDs in the document. So in that case, like we need to ensure that it is not duplicate. Or I'm going to be lazy for now, and I'm going to do the query selector. Okay, which is kind of a bad idea. So let me think. Anyway, actually, yeah, for the time being, let's try with this. If it doesn't work, then we can figure it out later. Row dot, now there is something called as row dot query selector. The way we had get element by ID, it's very similar to that, but this returns multiple references. In our case, we'll say that give me all the book IDs Oh, sorry, this one is for classes. Oh yeah, this one is for classes. Sorry, my bad there. Query selector is for class. So we have get element by ID for IDs, but we have query selector for getting a class. Now, where is this class book ID? You have defined it right here. Okay. Let me see. Do we actually have, oh, interesting. So we actually don't have any duplicate IDs in our single row. This is our single row. Forget about the template part. This is a single row, and actually in our row, everyone has a class, and you can have multiple classes / duplicate classes. That is fine. Having duplicate IDs is a bad idea. And thankfully, I remembered that when I was making it. Okay, so we actually don't have duplicate IDs. We only have duplicate classes, which is fine. Now, in this case, the first one is going to be book ID, and I'm going to say that change the text content of it. So currently the text content of this is actually empty. There's nothing here, okay, between this. There needs to be something here. So I'm going to say that actually make it the ID that comes back, like comes in. Next one is going to be a copy paste of this line. And that is going to be the book title. And the text content, and in this case, it would be book dot title. Now this book will have the title, and it will have a bunch of other things. So I'm going to say book.title. The next one would be the book author. Okay, this particular class. So book author. Text content would of course be the author name, but I'll actually highlight it in a way by saying that author colon, in here we'll have the book dot author underscore name. Again, how do I know that it is author underscore name? Because I've seen the API. So author underscore name, and if this exists, then in that I want the 0th element, or I'm going to say that this is the author is unknown. Like what if for some book you don't know the author? So that is what this particular line means. Okay, so author unknown. Okay, what else? Actually I can show you the API. Should limit it for, let's say, 5. Let it search. That should be simple and easy and kind of small. Now if I search for author underscore name, there you go. And this has only one author. So since this is an array, what I'm saying is that for this particular key, and in the array, find if there is the 0th element. In this case, there is. So that is the author name. But supposing this wasn't there, then in that case, we will show unknown. Okay. The next one is the book year. So I'm going to go row.query selector dot book dash year, and then dot text content. And again, I'm kind of going to do something like year is going to be not percent, $, curly brackets. In here, it would be book dot, how do I get the year? There is a first underscore publish underscore year. There we go. So the book year is 2009. Okay, in this case. So I basically am going to search for this particular key, book publish year, and that is actually going to be one value only, because, well, the same book is not getting published. Like the publish is the first time it was published. Okay, so the same book is published for the first time only once. So it has, at least in what I saw, only one result. So that's why I booked this. Or it's also possible that this does not come back and there is no year defined. In that case, unknown. So I'm going to copy this over for book pages as well and book description as well. So the next one is going to be book pages. Text content would be, instead of a year, this would be pages. And this, instead of first publish year, is actually, there is a number of pages median. Okay, the number of pages median, or unknown, like we don't know, or the not or the final one is description. And this one would, I think it's very easy to understand, so we will not show, will not put it in a backticks of this colon this. If there is a very long thing, then it is of course the description. Okay, description. So you can see that if I search here and I search for description, what happened here? Command F, description. Apparently this one doesn't have any description, which is very, very interesting. Okay, but no description, seriously? I mean, actually, I did not search for a book. I searched for an author name. There's no description, of course. So in that case, if you do something like that, you will show a no description available. Okay. So I think that is a good enough uh, explanation, and also a good enough row that we have created. Now let's focus on the next part, which is the images. Getting cover images. Okay, so now how do we get the cover image? So step one, so to show an image, okay, let's start on that first. So to show an image with a URL, where is our index.html? There we go. There's an image. So you can, in the source, define a URL. You don't have to do any fetch or anything. This is a default thing that is shown. So actually, I can go into the body, put it right here, go on the page, should put it inside a T row or something. And what else? A TD. Seriously? Okay, that's a lot of hassle to show an image. So I'm going to do it the easy way, which is I'm going to put it somewhere in the body, just below this, let's say. Yeah, there we go. So the image is here, and I did not have to make a request, a fetch request or anything to fetch the data from an API, because internally in the image SRC, if you put a URL, it can get the data, it can get the image, provided that at the end there is an image, there is a JPEG or PNG or whatever other formats of image exist and it supports. If that is what comes back from the URL and it is possible to load it, then it will load the image. Okay, so in our case we'll make use of that technique. Okay, and we will ensure that the thing that comes back, like we know that the cover image, okay, it is an image, so we'll directly put it in the image SRC and let it do the fetch magic in the background. We don't have to care about it. For now, I think this is the perfect time to stop this session. I have another session right after this, but I'm going to give you like a 10-minute break. And in that break, like just actually let me push what I have written till now so that you have the exact same code as I have. So if you have like fallen behind or something, copy it over, and I'll see you in 10 minutes. I'll send a reminder and I will join this Twitch again. Okay, let me do a quick git add, git commit. And git push. The code should be here. Yep, there you go. And yep, there you go. The code is in the chat. Take a quick look and copy it over, and we'll come back in 10 minutes and work on it again. Okay, see ya everyone. Cheers. Bye bye.